Ladies and gentlemen, anonymous cowards, you're tuned in to the Hidden Path Podcast. I'm your humble host, Resonance Rich. It's Friday night, November 9th, 2018, and we are so happy to have you. This show is brought to you by godlikeproductions.com, our home and community forum. We'd like to welcome you to head on over there, check out the site. You might find some fascinating information that could quite possibly blow your mind. Tonight, we have a very special guest, Aleksander Petakov. Aleksander is a documentary filmmaker who's created films that are focused on cryptozoology, which is the aim to prove the existence of entities from the folklore record. His film portfolio includes a docuseries on the one and only Bigfoot, another film named Champ after the elusive North American lake monster, and his up-and-coming film titled Lions of the East. We'll be talking to him tonight about these films and much more. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome him. Aleksander, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. How you doing tonight?
Great, man. Great. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm just hanging out here on a Friday night. Just was playing some Red Dead Redemption, so that was a lot of fun.
Oh, you're playing Red Dead Redemption? Oh, I heard that game is...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. I was just kind of getting my feet wet in it. It's a pretty in-depth game. There's a lot to it. It's a slow-moving game in a lot of ways because you got to take care of your horse. You got to do all this cowboy stuff. But I guess it's realistic in that sense.
Yeah, my brother's been playing it. He says the physics are unreal. Like, you'll leave tracks in the snow and all that. Crazy how they've developed that.
Yeah, I mean, I love the first Red Dead, so this is kind of natural to play this one. But
Yeah.
you know, it is very realistic, and the seamlessness between the graphics of like a cutscene and the actual gameplay is, I mean, they're identical. So it's really, really high quality stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, so my first question for you tonight is usually often I like to start this question off with guests, and that is, what got you started on your quest into becoming what you are now, a documentary filmmaker?
Sure. So, I mean, I don't know. I just kind of always was into filmmaking as a kid. You know, I used to do those kind of little home movies and get all the friends in the neighborhood and make my brother be like a monster and do all kinds of crazy stuff like that, you know, using little stop motion animation, kind of that sort of thing. And then, you know, in high school, I took media classes, digital media, got involved in some documentaries, studied communications in college, and it really got my kind of feet wet in terms of getting exposure with film projects and that sort of thing. And from there, I just kind of started doing it in my free time and combining it with cryptozoology, which is my other interest, my other passion. So they kind of naturally fit together in a way.
Right, right. Yeah. That's what I was going to ask you too is I can understand getting into film, but to go into cryptozoology, that's interesting. But that's an area that's not covered as much, it seems like. It's starting to get popular. But man, some of these I see like on the trail of Champ. This one, I've never even heard of Champ. Like, how did you discover that? Was that just from living in that area, or?
Yeah, I mean, Champ is actually, you know, I live in New England, so Champ is kind of in Vermont. So he's known in New England to some extent, but just if you know the cryptozoology stuff, if you're aware of like Loch Ness Monster and those sort of things, Champ comes up on the radar. And I grew up on a lot of these documentaries, you know, and these TV shows back in the day that were about these subjects. And that's really, I think, what kind of inspired me to combine those passions and say, well, I could, you know, make my own series about these sort of things and really pay homage to those classic series. We're talking like In Search Of, Discovery Channel kinds of stuff. And Champ was something that came up on the radar a little bit. And I've always been interested in lake monsters, especially Loch Ness. And Lake Champlain is kind of like America's Loch Ness. So at some point I was like, I want to tackle that. It's kind of right here in my backyard in New England. And I went into it, and oh man, it was quite a journey. And I still consider it, you know, something I'd like to tackle again in the future, kind of revisit it.
Yeah, it looks interesting. I haven't got a chance to check it out, but for those who want to look at it, I got it up on the stream here, and it's at petakovmedia.com. But did you see anything out there when you were doing this? I'm sure you had a lot of testimony, huh? A lot of stories you've heard. It had to chill you somehow, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting because, you have to go into these situations not really expecting to have anything go on, or, just kind of be sober minded. I'm not going to
Right.
head into an area and think like if something doesn't happen, I'm going to make up my mind one way or another. You have to be critical and sort of unbiased. So you take like an eyewitness testimony, you listen to it, and you kind of, it shouldn't completely color your opinion on the subject, but it's interesting. So a lot of the eyewitness testimonies in the series, were people who had seen things around the lake. There was, a guy who had seen something back in the 1950s, all the way up until, like their shoot date. So there was a huge variety of like the times in which people had the experiences, and I really tried to show a lot of those eyewitness encounters and kind of their recollections of their stories in the series, and that was a big part of the series. So almost every episode has sort of a eyewitness testimony or multiple, including those of the researchers, and that was really interesting. I mean, just hearing kind of the consistencies between some of the sightings and whether it's a similar behavior, similar description, similar size, kind of made me really wonder what is going on here. And that lake in itself is just such an enigma.
So it says shot on location at Lake Champlain, Vermont. Um, is this a lot? This is obviously a lot like Loch Ness. Did you see any similarities with that? As far as the whole story with Loch Ness. Obviously, this is another lake monster. But did you investigate much into Loch Ness and see the similarities between what you were finding at all?
Yeah, so one of the first actually kind of documentaries in this genre I did a couple of years ago was called Mystery at Loch Ness, and that was after visiting there for a few days. And Loch Ness was interesting. It was kind of Scottish Highlands, very green, kind of mountainous little terrain surrounding the lake, and then there's this huge lake. And there were definitely some similarities, but Lake Champlain probably blew me away even more. Lake Champlain was a place I'd been to as a kid and, kind of earlier in life, and I hadn't really put much thought into it. I, of course, always being aware of Champ, I was like, this is interesting, but really diving deep into it, no pun intended there, during the series was interesting because it was like, wow, this place is huge. I mean, Lake Champlain is like 120 something miles long, whereas
Wow.
Loch Ness is, I think, 24 miles long. So it's not as long. So it's they call Lake Champlain the west coast of New England for a reason, because it like straddles the whole border of Vermont almost with New York and into Canada, into Quebec a little bit. So it's this huge lake, and it actually has this biodiversity, which is considered to be some of the most amount of fish in North America, kind of biodiversity, things
Oh,
like
wow.
that. 94 or more species of fish in the lake. So it's a really interesting location. It's always been something that has interested me for sure.
Yeah. And we got your cover art pulled up here for the documentary, and is that sketched on what eyewitnesses have said he looks like? Looks like
Yeah.
looks like a velociraptor almost.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool piece of art. That was actually done by Stephen Bissett, who worked on some of the early Swamp Thing comics for DC Comics.
Oh, cool.
So that's really cool. We got him to do that for us, and he's a really interesting guy. He's a Vermont native, and I actually interviewed him for the series as well. He grew up in Vermont and has these stories, like many Vermonters, they have these stories of growing up and spending time around the lake, whether it's camp or family gatherings, and hearing stories about Champ. And it was kind of one of those stories that was told to kids, don't go too far in the water or Champ might get you. So that was really interesting. It was cool to talk to him. But yeah, that's actually a fun fact. Real snakeskin was used in that painting for the poster art. That's what
Oh,
Steve used in there, which is really neat. But yeah, the general eyewitness descriptions are sort of a dinosaur-like creature in the sense that it's sort of an aquatic reptile, like a plesiosaur, which would have been alive millions of years ago, 60 million years ago, time of the dinosaurs sort of thing. And that's sort of the general description. It's very similar to the descriptions of the Loch Ness Monster. You've got the long protruding neck and head, and then kind of humps for the body, generally like a grayish brown to a green sort of color, and black as well, so kind of things in between there. It's very interesting.
yeah, it's totally interesting, and even I've never heard of Champ before until you've brought it to my attention. But just from what I've heard of Loch Ness, it's fascinating, and it's like, well, we have a lot of creatures we see on this planet that are left over from the very ancient days, the dinosaur days. But you almost think maybe there could be something in the water. What's the most terrifying witness account you heard when doing this documentary?
Most terrifying witness.
Did any of them really stand out to you as just, oh, I wouldn't want to be there when they seen it like that?
I mean, I heard this story. This wasn't exactly an eyewitness encounter that was recounted to me, but it was told by another researcher who's involved in the subject and who gets kind of a barrage of sightings and has a database. But they said that there was one sighting where they were fishing. I guess it was a guy and his son, and they were fishing in kind of a small boat, and something started pulling the line and pulled the boat for however many feet. I don't know if that's verified, but it's interesting. But to my knowledge, there have been no kind of violent or vicious attacks. Generally, the descriptions of the creature, it tends to be seen getting away from people when it's seen. So it's very elusive. It's probably aware of people's presence, if it exists. Like many other fish, many large fish, especially in a lake like Lake Champlain, you've got sturgeon, you've got landlocked salmon, things like that. These animals, when people kind of get into their area, they will scatter. They can hear the sounds of the boats and those sort of things. So that's why when you're fishing, of course, you have to stop and just kind of hang out for a bit and wait for them to come to you. So if there's something larger in there, you would imagine that it would have similar behavior, and it would be able to distinguish, maybe areas of traffic where a ferry might be crossing. There's a couple ferries that cross the lake. So, and generally there haven't been very many sightings. There have been a few associated with the ferries, but it makes you wonder, what kind of behaviors a creature like that would have if it were adapted to living in a lake that's been inhabited by humans for, hundreds of years.
Yeah, definitely. I've been up on the East Coast quite a few times in my life in the past, and Vermont is very it's different. It's unpopulated, so I could imagine going up that way. It's kind of rural up there, and it just sets the scene in my mind. And I can understand what you say from going from where Loch Ness is to going to Vermont at this Lake Champlain, and it's setting the scene for you. When did you shoot this docuseries Champ? Did you shoot it? What season did you shoot it during? Was it during summer?
So yeah, it was mostly filmed during the summer of 2017.
Okay.
I did 3 weekend shoots, so I would just head up there. I'm in kind of the Boston area, so it's about 3 hours from where I'm at. So I did 3 weekend shoots and kind of crammed those weekends as much as I, interviewing the researchers, spending time with them, doing their endeavors, whether it was heading out onto the lake in a boat or checking out the areas they frequent, then talking to eyewitnesses. And, I even went to an event that was called kind of Champ Day, where one of the towns on the New York side of the border has sort of a festival they put on for kind of Champ, which is their mascot.
Wow.
In a way, Port Henry, New York. So, I kind of attended that and just hung out, and it's near a famous bay where there's been a lot of sightings. So that was cool. But then I did have one shoot in January. I wanted to do a winter shoot just to cover that sort of area, because I felt like no one had really done research in the winter. Right. I know that there are researchers who do it, but I've never seen a documentary about Champ that has covered that aspect, or at least, kind of headed out onto the ice, because large parts of the lake do freeze over. I mean, Vermont is obviously a pretty northern state, so there's a pretty harsh winter, and depending on the year, sometimes the entire lake will freeze over. Other times it won't, and only like the little bays and inlets will. That was interesting. But one thing I did forget to mention about the similarities between Loch Ness and Lake Champlain is how they're both on a very similar kind of plane. If you look at where they're located, you can almost draw a line to the both of them, and they have a parallel with a lot of these northern lakes in North America, and there's a lot of other lakes in the UK and Scotland especially, where there are reports of lake monsters, and a lot of these lakes were glacial lakes, so they were formerly under glaciers and that sort of thing. So it's a lot of these lakes in particular have sightings. Now Lake Champlain, of course, has a very interesting history, being once part of what was called the Champlain Sea, and a much larger body of water where 10,000 years ago the glacier started receding, and there was actually whales and beluga whales and marine mammals that lived in Lake Champlain. And they believe that once the ice receded, that's when the water got kind of cut off with the St. Lawrence Seaway. So there's actually some species of fish in the lake that are believed to be holdovers from the ocean. So like the sturgeon, the landlocked Atlantic salmon, things like that. The sea lamprey, perhaps. They found whale skeletons in parts of Vermont that used to be underwater. So there is this very interesting kind of history. And around that time, 10,000, 12,000 years ago, is when hunter-gatherer groups of people started moving into the area, and they actually hunted, the seals and the animals that were found in Lake Champlain. So the theory is that maybe something larger adapted from that sea period.
Right, right. Yeah, and I wonder too. You mentioned glaciers. They're always finding what, like mammoth, full mammoths that are still mostly encased in ice. Yeah, I wonder if something like this couldn't have got stuck in a glacier, right? And once it melted, it maybe came back to life, maybe like cryogenics. Who knows? It's funny
no,
you mentioned that.
Reminds me of Ice Age, kind of one of the Ice Age movies. I used to watch those, the animated things, and they had like the dinosaurs coming out of the ice, or the aquatic reptiles, whatever. That was kind of funny.
Yeah, so that's one thing. Like you said, the festival they had for Champ. I was going to ask you that. When I've watched docuseries like this, I always wonder, man, how do these people get these witnesses? Where do they go? Do they go to researchers? I guess that would be my question. How did you find all the eyewitnesses? Was it other researchers, or did you go out and put ads in the paper? How was that process?
Yeah, so luckily I was in contact with some of the researchers. Now, with a lake or a mystery like Champ, there really aren't that many researchers. So it's a lot different than perhaps the Bigfoot researching community, where you've got thousands of people across North America. So you contact any of them, someone's going to know someone who's seen something. With Champ, there's really only a handful of people who actively investigate. So I have been lucky enough to have contact with them, and they sort of let me know about the eyewitnesses and the best eyewitnesses. And I knew some of them. So one of the people I really wanted to interview was Sandra Mancy, who had taken the famous photo of the kind of the creature sticking out of the water. It was taken in 1977. I knew I wanted to interview her, and luckily one of the researchers I knew was friends with her, and he linked us up. And I never got to interview her in person, unfortunately, as her health was not the greatest, and she just passed away this past spring. But I did get to interview her over the phone, and that was amazing. That was something as a kid, I grew up watching her talk about her testimony on TV, and to be able to speak with her and include it in the series was amazing. But in terms of other eyewitnesses, the researchers really, really kind of hooked me up with people. And sometimes I would even just, I'd be at a marina or a dock, and I would just strike up a conversation with people and ask them about what they thought of Champ. Sometimes I'd get the response, oh, I don't think there's anything to it. Other times I'd get, yeah, we've had stuff happen. We've seen stuff growing up here. That was interesting. But definitely the researchers helped me link up with eyewitnesses. So like one of the eyewitnesses was a friend of one of the researchers, and he had a sighting, couple days, or a week before I was filming. So that was really interesting. And he took us to the spot where it happened. It was kind of in like a little inland or like a bay that was connected to a river, this kind of 30-foot deep, 30-foot wide river, or a creek as they call it there.
Okay.
And he was able to take us right to the spot. He was kind of living on his boat at the time. At night he had this sort of thing he saw, and he used to be a park ranger there at a state park. So very interesting to talk to people like that. But yeah, we had a whole host of eyewitnesses that we got to interview, and it was really, really interesting to just hear, like I was saying earlier, the kind of the consistencies and what they experienced that differed from other people and that sort of thing.
Right. And I bet a lot of these people aren't just like people that are looking for attention. They're not probably out there broadcasting themselves. They're probably just normal everyday people, and they've seen something. Really don't have an agenda to go out and lie, I imagine. So if you see the similarities, it's got to, make you think.
Yeah, exactly. There's having interviewed a lot of people over the years, I suppose, over the Sasquatch topic, lots of eyewitnesses, other creatures as well, other phenomena. You kind of get a gauge of when someone is telling the truth. You can kind of tell when someone's pulling your leg, for example.
Yes, yeah. Somebody gives
it's
off
pretty,
that vibe. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And you experience those. You meet a lot of strange people in this field for sure. People who maybe are, maybe they've had a real sighting and they kind of convince themselves that there's really something going on here. So
Yes.
they start going down this path of everything is kind of this thing. It's confirmation bias. It's seeing what you want to see, sort of thing. And a lot of people, I think they legitimately had an experience that they truly believe what they saw, and then they kind of went down this path. But then there are witnesses who, you got to deem a little bit more with kind of credibility in terms of, what do they have to lose? If they have more to lose than to gain, then that probably means that they're not pulling your leg,
Right.
and they truly believe what they saw. I don't know what they saw. I can't say for any of these eyewitnesses unless I was there with them and saw something come out of the water. I can't say what they saw definitely, but I know they saw something strange. And if it's someone like who's lived on the lake their entire life, have fished on the lake, they know what all the species look like. When they see something they can't identify, that's really interesting. And we had a bunch of those encounters as well. And those were just, the most mind-blowing ones, because it really makes you wonder, man, there's something in the lake. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I would see it, but there could be something there. And I, ultimately with the documentary series, I try to present as many facts as possible about the history of the lake and kind of the geography, the geology, all that sort of stuff, as well as the theories, the eyewitnesses, and then what some of the skeptics or scientists sort of might say to negate, I guess, the stories and kind of have a rational explanation, a little bit less sensationalistic, and let people make up their own mind at the end of the day, because I don't want to put my personal feelings or bias into it. I just try and lay out everything and say, hey, think of this however you might.
Yeah. Taking the viewer on a journey as if your journey, right? Documenting your journey. Yeah, and I imagine there's some people you probably approached that were maybe a little hesitant. Maybe they didn't want to be a part of it. Maybe they, we always have those people that, are happy to talk, but some of those that are wondering if this might ruin their reputation or whatnot. Did you have any of those types?
Yeah. Unfortunately, you get those, and I don't blame people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That work. They don't want to be seen as crazy or a kook or maybe detrimental to their credibility or in terms of their job and that sort of thing. So I can totally understand it. I've had people that I spoke with, there at Lake Champlain specifically as well, where they told me the story about what happened and it was really interesting, and then I kind of, because I really like to try and accommodate the eyewitnesses and be as generous as I can to them and kind of make them feel like their story matters, because I think it does, and be as honest as I can with them about my intentions, especially. So, when I'll ask them, would you be willing to maybe talk about this on camera a little bit? I'd really like to talk about it. We could even like blur out your face or do that sort of thing. And people still say, I don't know. I don't think I'm ready for that just yet, and that sort of thing. And I can understand that. That happens a lot. I've experienced that plenty of times. And for me, at least, it's cool enough to be able to talk to them and hear their experience, and then kind of put that in my own database of sightings and encounters, because that, at the end of the day, is still rewarding for me, if anything. And then I can sort of talk about it, and they don't have to worry about me mentioning specifics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And even those kind of testimonies where they won't even talk in front of the camera, even if their face is blurred out, those you got to hold pretty close, I'd imagine, because
I mean, for example,
weight.
Yeah. For example, one of the stories, I won't give too many specifics on it, but it was a gentleman who was, kind of fishing in this area that we had been filming in. And, I'd overheard the story that his family had some sort of history of encountering a creature in this swampy area, and kind of nicknamed it like a giant beaver sort of thing, which is really an interesting way to describe it. It would have been interesting to interview him, but, he chose not to. And that's fine. Like I said, I try to accommodate the eyewitnesses, and then the ones that actually do want to testify, fully with their name and everything like that. People that say, I have nothing to lose. People know me in this community. They know I'm not crazy. If one little story is going to ruin my reputation, then those people probably shouldn't even be friends with me anyway. So I like those people that have that attitude. But But yeah, like I said, just trying to be as accommodating to them as possible, because ultimately they're giving a piece of their life and their life story to you to kind of
Yes.
talk about, bring more awareness to.
Absolutely, and those experiences have to be pretty shocking, first of all, and something they not going to forget. So they're letting you in definitely. So to be comfortable is very nice. Um, you had mentioned earlier Sandra Mancy's picture. We pulled that up. I pulled it up here, and man, I've never seen that before. And they're saying it's a 6 foot tall creature, neck at 150 feet from the camera. That is fascinating.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's, I mean, basically considered the kind of gold standard of any lake monster evidence. It's basically considered the best photo in the world. You have, of course, the famous Loch Ness photo from the 1930s, which is kind of, at this point, it's very controversial. A lot of people think that, it was actually a hoax. There's some that still believe that it's got some legitimacy. I
yeah,
don't really know. I don't really know where I stand on that, but I kind of I steer clear of it. It was a long time ago,
yeah.
and I have my own feelings about what happened and with the whole Loch Ness story. But with this photo, Champ in particular, having talked to Sandra Mancy in depth, it was really interesting to
Oh, you
hear.
talked to her? Wow.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So she was actually one of the interviews in the series. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, I felt that given that she has kind of the most important piece of the whole puzzle, to not interview her while talking about this series would have been, very unfortunate. And like I said, I was lucky enough to
Yeah,
interview her
good
over the
job.
phone. Yeah, and yeah, her story. I really don't believe that she would hoax or embellish anything. I think that what she saw was legitimately there that day, and truly is on the camera. I mean, they've done analysis that has determined that the photograph was not tampered with, in the sense that no one had digitally enhanced the photo. I mean, this was taken in the 70s, so it would have been a lot harder to do that as opposed to now, where you have Photoshop and that sort
Yeah,
of thing.
it's not
It's a lot
digital.
easier.
Back in the analog days, right?
Exactly. So they determined that that object was truly there that day.
Wow.
That then the question comes up, what it was. I don't know.
Yeah.
One of the theories that I had was of a researcher who investigates these sort of things, and his theory was there was some kind of a strange log that had come out, and I put that in the documentary as well, kind of his animations he came up with to try and explain what had happened, what she had actually been seeing, and how from that distance it may have come off as like a creature looking thing. And, talking to her, she was very adamant that it was a living creature that was looking around and
Wow.
interacting with the setting, and it scared them because their kids were kind of waiting around at the shore, and her husband
Huh.
and Sandra kind of freaked out and got the kids out, and she got that one photo. I mean, if she had just gotten a couple more photos, it would have been a totally different story. But like I said, I don't think that she pulled off a hoax with her family. I mean, it would have been extremely difficult to do that anyway.
Yeah.
And if someone was hoaxing her, I don't know what the probability of them hoping that somebody would happen to stumble across this sort of little bay in the middle of the lake and have this creature out there and then have it disappear. It just seems very, very unlikely. I mean, it's possible. You can't rule that out. But it is just, it's iconic. It's an iconic photo. It's just so interesting, and it really created a whole set of enthusiasm for that subject when it came out in the 1980s in the New York Times. The story broke, and that was when kind of Champ mania started, and it's settled down since then a little bit. It's kind of gone in and out of popularity, but yeah, it was just talking to her was definitely invaluable.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it was.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure because, like we mentioned earlier, you can kind of tell when somebody's leading you on. I mean, even I'll listen to radio shows and I can tell. Well, this guy just likes to talk, right? Uh, so you being in person with her, or even other witnesses, you can get that feeling. You can kind of feel from them whether or not almost like a truth scale in your own way, somewhat. But
Yeah, yeah, and hearing just her story over the years, in other documentary programs and things like that, she was always consistent with her story. She never really changed any of the details or anything like that, and she stuck with it. And she didn't really want so much to gain anything from it, aside from, she was convinced that it was a real creature, that these are real species, and in her mind, she wanted to help preserve that for the people of Vermont and sort of that region in Lake Champlain. And she actually donated the photograph, the original photo, to a local science center in Burlington, Vermont, that has like an aquarium, and they study the lake in some capacity, and they have like public displays for
Wow.
some animals that live in the lake. So her idea was that she wanted to preserve that legacy for the people of Vermont, and to be sort of educational in the sense of, there is this creature out there. We need to protect the lake because of this amazing thing that's in there. So that's where she was coming from. And that was interesting to kind of really see that she was sincere in that regard, even in her old age, as she was before she passed away, and dealing with, kind of health issues. She was really adamant about this story and what had happened, and kind of the legacy that it had left on her. And she didn't become rich, or I guess she became famous in some respects, that she was kind of the person that took this photo, but she didn't become a millionaire or anything
Right.
like that. She still, she would do sporadic interviews for TV programs and that sort of thing every once in a while, but she didn't become like a millionaire overnight or anything.
Right. So we have a question that popped up in the chat for you from a guy named Seydu. He says, "What's the most frustrating thing when conducting research?"
Ooh, the most frustrating thing, probably like logistics. That's what I would say. I
Yeah.
So I'll give an example with this Champ series. I had the second shoot weekend where I was heading down July of 2017, or heading up to the lake rather, to go to this Champ Day event. And I'm filming at the event, and I meet this guy. I was filming like there was this parade float of a champ. I was just getting some B-roll, getting some shots, and this guy comes up to me. He's like, "Oh, you getting some good footage of the champ there?" And we start talking, and he says, "I've had a sighting," and I interview him, and it was one of the better interviews I had for my series. So that was a totally like random kind of interview. But then I ended up talking to him like all day. He was a very talkative guy, great guy, just one of those people that doesn't know when to stop talking in a way. So I got all this footage of this event and things like that, and kind of the day flew by, and I'm like, oh man, I feel like I should have gotten more footage with the drone or this or that. And then that next day, I was scheduled to go interview Sandra Mancy at this aquarium, and she was sick and she wasn't able to make it. So I had to go to the aquarium then and just kind of get footage of the animals and the other stuff. So like I said, logistics, kind of when things fall through, that's sort of the most frustrating thing. But luckily, I consider myself pretty resourceful in the sense that I was able to get right back on track and
Yeah.
fill in kind of lost time with other things. And some of the great interviews I got that particular weekend, happened by accident, or happened, in the wake of somebody canceling something and rearranging a time. So
Yeah. We had interviewed that actress who was part of the German filmmaking for Space 1889. She said, "Man, some things would just come together like it was meant to happen. I mean, things would open up and things would happen." So that's always got to feel good, but it's got to be frustrating when it goes the opposite way, I imagine, where things just don't come together. I can see logistics being a nightmare sometimes, I'm sure.
It's definitely scary, especially when you've got money on the line. When you have the production company. In this case, I'm doing it for my buddy's company, Small Town Monsters, and we've got like money on the line. We've put all this equipment that we've rented, and we only have like a certain amount of time to film it in because we have this rental stuff to return on Monday.
Right.
And you just worry like, oh no, is this like a waste of time? But somehow everything kind of worked out. Somehow things came together. And whether that's the work of a higher power or not, I don't know. But some things, I guess, are just meant to be. And
Yeah,
it was
definitely.
meant to tell a story. Yeah.
And this is great information you're bringing out too. And I think people more and more nowadays are looking for this kind of thing. The unknown, the cryptozoology in general is a fascinating subject. And this seems to be your high point with what you're doing. Absolutely. Other than driving around North Korea, that's interesting. I was seeing that on your site. How was that, being in North Korea?
Oh man, that's one of those things that always comes up. It was interesting. It was life changing kind of trip because it really puts things into perspective. Puts you in this kind of
Yeah.
place. all odds are stacked against you, but it makes you realize how interesting the world actually is. And it's one of these unknown places. I mean, North Korea is constantly in the news, especially the last couple of years as well. And the time I went was right after I graduated college, and I was traveling for a little bit. And, I had these good friends in South Korea, and I spent a while in South Korea. And then, kind of as like a joke, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be so cool to go to North Korea? And I started researching it, and I found out it's actually pretty easy to go.
Is
I
it?
ended up going.
Wow.
Yeah, well, not anymore actually. For Americans, we're not allowed to go anymore due to the with kind of the escalation, I guess, in the earlier parts of the Trump presidency. There was this ban. Especially, I can understand it after the guy who died after being released from North Korea. The kid, the kind of the university student who had been held there. It happened to be like a month after I was there, which is crazy.
Wow.
And obviously, really tragic to hear about that.
Yeah.
And
the film,
but it was being there. It was so interesting being there. It was kind of like I was only there for about 5 days, but they take you on these tours, and you're on a government tour, and they're taking you to all these museums that have like the most realistic, lifelike statues you've ever seen in your life.
Wow! Like a wax museum.
It was a museum for the Korean War, so it was kind of their take on the Korean War, and they had this, in particular, this statue of Kim Il-sung, who was the first leader of North Korea. So he's the guy who kind of freed the northern part of Korea, at least, from the Japanese during World War II and that occupation, and then against obviously the U.S. and the UN forces there that fought during the Korean War, and then became the dictator up until like the 90s when his son took over. And they had this huge statue of him, and it was unbelievable. And there was this like strange sky kind of color. It's kind of like one of those things you might see at like Las Vegas. What is it in the Venetian? They have that kind of fake sky. I don't know if you know what I'm talking
yeah, I've seen pictures of it.
Behind this statue, and it was this huge, like 20-foot tall statue that looked so lifelike. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. I'm like, that looks just like, the Kim Jong-un, who's the new guy. And I was like, I realized that was Kim Il-sung, but Kim Jong-un, who's of course his grandson, the current leader,
right.
He does to try and look like his grandfather because he's very revered and respected. So he tries to get the haircut, and I think he's gotten surgery a couple times to resemble him more closely, at least from what I hear. All the information we have about North Korea is probably skewed, given that it's such a strange place, and nobody really knows what's going on in North Korea, except for maybe the top kind of party people there. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, so the filmmakers we spoke to, also from Space 1889, they went to China, and they said they were, they had a government official. I imagine you had the same situation. You said they took you around. I'm sure you couldn't venture off too much, I imagine, right, in North Korea?
Yeah. I mean, the only time you were alone was basically in a bathroom or in the hotel room at night. I happened to have, I was supposed to be in a double with somebody else, but I ended up having a room to myself, and I had this balcony which had the view of Pyongyang. And at night, I mean, seeing that, like the capital city, how dimly lit it was. There was almost no lights on. I mean, you would never see that in any other capital city, and that was interesting. But yeah, so I mean, I was with a group of about 60 other tourists. There was a good amount of Americans, Brits, Germans, French, Japanese, Australians, all sorts of people, and it was really interesting. And we were kind of split up into groups, and you have Korean guides who work for the obviously government-run tourist board of North Korea, and then there were some tour guides who are American and British and other nationalities from the company in China that runs these tours in conjunction with the North Korean government. And then we had a camera guy. They put together kind of this cheesy like DVD after the whole trip. And then there was another guy who was like a tour guide, but he was definitely like a government watcher. He kind of knew everything about you, and they obviously had some intel. That was interesting. I had some kind of funny conversations with him, and by the end, I sort of struck a weird friendship with him. I asked him about his family, and he told me how many kids he had, and we were at this temple in the southern part of North Korea, right near the DMZ, kind of the border with South Korea. It was this old kind of Korean temple. And there was this like plastic lawn chair, one of those kind of cheesy little lawn chairs just sitting up at the right near this pagoda, and my camera with me. We were allowed to take pictures in designated areas and things like that. He tells me to go sit in the lawn chair and take a photo, and he took the photo, and like the entire top of the pagoda was cropped and everything. But I can say I have a picture that was taken by somebody that was clearly like some kind of intelligence or something in North Korea. So that was interesting.
Wow, wow. So we know from cryptozoology and folklore, every area's got its own little creature, or some areas. Did you find that in North Korea? Is there? I guess I'm not aware. Was there any legends in North Korea, or did you hear of anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's one that comes to mind is the famous Mount Pektu, which is sort of the mountain. It borders. It's mostly in China, but part of it's in North Korea. And there's this lake in the top. I think it's called Lake Tianchi. I'm not totally sure, but it's this lake kind of on this in this mountain. And there's this legend that supposedly there's a lake monster in there as well, and it's been seen by various people. But that mountain is kind of the holy mountain for people in all of Korea. I remember being in South Korea and seeing pictures of this mountain. I think it's like a dormant volcano or something, and that's why at the top where the volcanic entrance would have been is where the water actually is. So that was interesting. But it has connection to supposedly that's where Kim Il Sung was born, and he kind of there was unicorns involved and all sorts of things.
Oh, unicorns, fancy.
So I don't exactly know that element of it because that's the kind of the creation myth they have in North. But I know that lake in particular happens to have sort of a creature that's depicted, and it's a lake monster. Aside from that, I don't really know too many other cryptozoology legends, so to speak, in North or South Korea or the whole Korean peninsula. But I'm sure there are a fair share of stories. Just like any human culture, we have this need to create monsters, and whether or not they're based in reality, that's what kind of interests me. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're perhaps figments of imagination, a need for us to project some sort of monstrosity that lives in the mountains or the deep crevasses or the lakes or the rivers, the oceans, whatever the case may be. But the ones that are based in some sort of actual creature, has someone interested in cryptozoology, that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, and that is something you bring up, is that we do as a species have that need to create monsters. There's so many folklore legends. What do you think that is? Do you think that's just imagination gone wild and just everybody's got to embellish a story? Some people say, "Oh yeah, he was 10 foot tall," and you think it's just embellishment and the need to storytell as human beings. We love storytelling.
Yeah, I think we do. I really think we do. And if you look at any culture, whether it's religion or kind of creation myths, you have these sort of larger than life stories that start at one point and just kind of keep going. And whether it's oral traditions or written traditions or legend that are passed down from generation to generation, we have a need for it. Like I kind of said earlier, with the need to project something, because we're a species that's different from any other animal that's out there in the sense that we have created society, we have all this technology, we're definitely separate. We are part of the natural world, but we're not the same as a gorilla or a frog. Obviously we're something totally different, so we've kind of have a degree of separation with nature, and we fear it and respect it in a lot of ways, maybe not as much as we should. And we've kind of established dominion over the natural world, so we have the need for maybe creatures that are more powerful than us. We're the apex predator, we're the alpha creatures out there, we're the top of the food chain, nothing else can get to us. But then you put someone in the woods at night with more of a story of a creature that's 10 feet tall and supposedly eats people, for example, like a lot of Native American and Indian stories about kind of Sasquatch. Oh, yeah. You realize how little control you have over a situation like that, and that freaks people out. And I think that's why we've always had stories of monsters, and even some of the classic monsters, the werewolf, the dragon, that sort of thing. These were creatures that were said to lurk in these dark recesses of the world that were told as stories as the boogeyman, stay out of this area, this creature's there, as a devil monster, devil mountain, the way places are named as well, because they look creepy from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And but like I said, there's definitely a fair share of stories out there that are based in reality. Tribes in the parts of Africa in the jungles there, they had stories of a large, hairy, ape-like creature that lived in the mountains, and lo and behold, that turned out to be a mountain gorilla. Or other parts of the world where there were these strange stories that turned out to be a real animal.
Yeah. Right. And, you know, it's fascinating too. I'm sure along your research, you've had to stumble across like David Pilates, right?
Yeah.
Missing 411, which frightens me whenever I listen to it. It sounds like something bad's out in the woods when you're listening to his stories, but that would be an interesting one for you to do, actually. Try to go out there and find it. But I don't know if I'd vouch for that. That would just be too
Yeah,
scary.
I do a lot of hiking and backpacking up here in New England. We have these mountain ranges, and you kind of were mentioning earlier how Vermont, there's a lot of woods and things like that, and
Yeah.
we have Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, some of these northern states that are like 85-90% forested, and there's just millions of acres. And when I'm out there in the middle of the woods and 4,000, 5,000 foot mountains, you really get creeped out at times. And I think back to some of those David Pilates stories where I'm like missing 411. This person was found 20 miles away from when they originally were, last seen, with like missing clothing, just disoriented,
Yeah.
all this. You start thinking back to like the X-Files and all sorts of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be crazy, but chances are that probably nothing's going to happen. But those stories are interesting, and I've heard some very creepy stories up in the north woods of New Hampshire, whether it's the Bigfoot sort of stuff, or even missing people, and possible like military base involvement. Really weird kind of stuff.
Definitely.
But I don't really know what to make of it. But like I said, as someone who hikes a lot and is out there at for extended periods of time, it can be a little disconcerting at times.
Oh, I'm sure I'd have to block it out of my mind somehow. Um, but let's get to Bigfoot, actually. Sasquatch Out of the Shadows. I'm seeing this is your documentary web series that's actually free on YouTube. Hey, that's nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Where was a lot of that done at? Was that up in that area in the Northeast?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of Northeast. There's other states as well. That kind of was sparked after a trip out in the Pacific Northwest. I went on a family vacation a couple years ago, and we were out going to the redwoods and that sort of area. And I've always wanted to. It was my first time in the redwoods. I always wanted to go there.
Oh, me too.
That's Bigfoot country. I mean, someone interested in cryptozoology and this sort of thing, of course. I know the stories of the 1950s and 60s is really when the Bigfoot myth kind of took off. The Bigfoot legend, in a sense, because it was in Northern California. So I went to the town Willow Creek, where it's kind of considered the Bigfoot capital of the world. We went to Bluff Creek as well, which is near where the famous Patterson-Gimlin footage was taken.
Yeah.
And I interviewed some people, and out of that, I kind of was like, I'm going to do a documentary about Bigfoot and start out with the history of it right at where it started. And then I started talking to people back in New England who had sightings in New England and experiences, and I just kind of started getting all this footage, and I'm like, wow, this is so much stuff. I feel like some of these stories would be better suited as their own, as opposed to trying to scramble and put it into one documentary. So then I'm like, you know what, I might as well just do kind of a web series and have it open-ended, so I can keep going. I mean, maybe 2-3 years from when I start, I can have a totally different opinion about something, or
Right.
I can have totally content. And I started just putting kind of episodes together. So the first one is about like the history of it in California. Then I go to just an eyewitness interview. Then, researchers in the New England area. And then I was out in Ohio as well. And Ohio is like the fourth state in the U.S. with like the most sightings out of any other state. You've got the Pacific Northwest, and then Ohio for some reason is like a hot spot. I was out there a couple of years ago as well, and interviewing some very interesting Bigfoot researchers. So it's been kind of open-ended. I just posted, like the other day, I posted an interview I did with Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who to those in this community is very well known as an anthropologist, who's, a professional scientist, college professor, who actually investigates this subject and is an expert in human evolution and anatomy and physiology, and he lends credence to this subject. So it was interesting to interview him. And, I'm starting to put out little interviews like that and that sort of thing. But it's very, like I said, it's very open-ended. So there's, the classic sort of documentary style, which you'll see in the episodes. And then there's little interviews and other kind of interesting things that I've come across, just knowing people in this field and having the chance to meet people that are interested in it. One of the next interviews I'll have up is a New York University DNA expert. He's an anthropologist who looks at DNA, Dr. Todd Disotell, and he's studied hundreds of alleged Bigfoot DNA and hair samples that have been sent to him from across the world for various TV programs, things like that. And just to hear his take on, what he thinks about the whole Bigfoot mystery is interesting, and I think serves a purpose for people researching or just interested in this subject.
Yeah, is somebody like him convinced about it? Because we've seen that before on shows, the DNA, the hairs found, sent in, and, you kind of get, well, it could be something. How's he feel, do you think, about it? Does he think that it is something else?
From what I could gather from the interview I got with him, he was a little bit more skeptical. He's like, I would like to believe it exists, but to this point, I have not had any sample that has been strange or unusual in any way. A lot of it is misidentification. He said we got a lot of bear samples, a lot of horse, a lot of human, and apparently a lot of the DNA can be very easily contaminated with outside source.
Oh wow!
He mentioned even breathing on a sample could destroy it if it's fragile enough, and kind of the procedures to properly collect a sample and make sure you do it in a way that doesn't contaminate it or ruin the sample, and what type of materials to use. But yeah, like I said, it's just interesting to talk to people like that because they're trained professionals that they're used to working on, in his case, primates, and he works with non-human primates and that sort of thing. So it's very similar. You could surmount to kind of the Bigfoot mystery. If it's a primate, an ape, he would use similar procedures, of course, to analyze the DNA. But according to him, he hasn't had anything that is totally matching, some sort of unknown primate or anything like that. So the search continues.
Search is always continuing. These creatures, they're so elusive, man. And, as we catch up now more and more with technology, cameras on almost anything you buy that's technological, you think we'd almost catch a better glimpse at it. It's always just out of grasp. And I noticed you do a lot of drone footage too. That is awesome footage, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really, the drones are amazing. I've been droning, I suppose would be a good way to put it. Droning for about, 3 years now, 3 or 4 years.
What do you use to drone? Which kind?
So now I'm on a DJI Mavic Pro. So the smaller one, now I really like that one because it's compact and you can throw it in your backpack and really easily take it hiking around to remote areas. And it's got a little bit of a better battery life, and the controller is much more portable. But I used to even lug around my DJI Phantom 3, which I had. Yeah, I would just strap it to my backpack, and the controller itself would be a whole section of the backpack. But if you've got one of those, I have a military style hiking pack, so I plenty of room in there, luckily. But yeah, the Mavic is just awesome. It's just so portable, and it's just amazing to be on a summit, for example, that has no views, completely covered with trees. You just throw the drone up 20 feet and you can see the whole mountain range behind you, which you can't see because you're on a wooded summit. But yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I like that footage you got there of Colorado. What part of Colorado was that, by the way? We're actually down here in Colorado.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that was a couple different parts. One of my buddies lives out in the Boulder area.
Okay.
So I think it was
probably Estes Park or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah, we were in Estes Park for part of it, so some of the footage there at the beginning. Then we were out by Nederland, however you say it.
Netherlands, yeah. I think it's Netherlands.
They have a weird dead guy festival, with the frozen dead guy. That's what my friend told me about. I'm like, that sounds really fascinating.
Yeah.
And then we were down Pikes Peak. We did Pikes Peak, and then we were out in the eastern part of the state, actually, kind of the prairies, and there were these buttes. We were out there doing some skeet shooting and just kind of having fun. national preserve there. So
Yeah, did you go to the Pawnee Buttes by any chance? Was that it?
that was the Pawnee Buttes. That's exactly it.
Yes, I've been there. That's fascinating land right there, huh?
Oh man, it was we like hiked out into an area and we were doing some shooting out there. It was just like very. I think I
Wilderness. It's yeah, I go out there sometimes from time to time and it is just it's beautiful in its own way.
Yeah, and it's like very Wild West. I don't know, someone who's
Definitely.
pretty much on the East Coast. Traveling out to the West Coast, I'm always listening to my Marty Robbins whenever I'm out there, and
Big
really kind
iron.
of exactly
Yeah, man.
just living up the cowboy dream. But that setting was perfect, and it was funny. I think I'd like left my charger in the car, and my phone had died, and I really wanted to get some good shots out there, so I like, had to hike back to the car and meet up back with my friends because we were kind of going over some of the buttes because there's a couple different kind of trails you can go on. But it was totally crazy because we did that, and then like the next day we went down to Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak. Right after that, we went to the Great Sand Dunes, which is like probably one of my favorite places
That
in
place
North.
is crazy. Yeah, it's down there by Alamosa, I think. And I've driven past it. I haven't gotten it, but you can see it from the road and it's like, "What? Am I in
It's
Egypt
insane.
now?"
Yeah, it was in the San Juan Valley. I mean, that whole area has a whole history of like UFO stuff,
Yes.
the cattle mutilations, all that. So it's just such a weird convergence of places. And we did like a long hike to one of the top of the dunes there, and man, it was so amazing. It was like you literally feel like you're in a desert, and then you blow
Mhm.
off or you kick some of the sand, and there's snow underneath it. This was in January that I was there, and then you just look up, and there's these epic mountains right in the back, and to the other side, it's just these plains, these flat plains that extend for as far as the eye can see, and it's like such a weird convergence of,
It
of
is.
terrain and geography, and it's incredible. And like I said, it's one of my favorite places in North America, just visual from a visual standpoint. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And standing there, you'd probably see this what is it, the San Juan Mountains and you go down to get close to Dulce, New Mexico, which has a lot of stories in its own, huh? Have you been,
Absolutely.
did you go down there at all?
I didn't make it down there. No, I've been to New Mexico when I was younger. I haven't. I really want to get back there and go out to the White Sands, and then there's that whole like missile testing area, and that obviously is connected to like the Roswell sort of stories. But
Mhm.
yeah, man, Colorado is such a beautiful state. I just hope to spend more time out there. I was out in Utah actually back in March, and I love Utah. I'm in the national parks there. It's absolutely unreal. A little bit of northern Arizona. So I've been in a lot of the western states, and I really like that region, kind of Colorado and then into the Southwest. I definitely want to check out, Wyoming, Idaho, that sort of area as well, because I feel like there's a lot of cool stuff to see out there nature wise. I'm a huge nature guy, so for me, it's like being in heaven every
Oh
time.
yeah, yeah, it's great. And I was seeing you were in Iceland. That looks beautiful nature-wise. Gosh, how was that?
Yeah, I mean that feels like another planet. Iceland is, it's not contrary to the name. It's actually very green. There
Yeah.
there's a lot. It's they kind of joke around. They say Greenland and Iceland should be opposites because Greenland is actually the icy one, but there are a lot of glaciers in Iceland as well. And just from a nature perspective, it's crazy. You go from like a black sand beach one day to seeing a glacier to seeing this like weird area of the road where there's just as far as the eye can see, there's these little like rocks that are covered in moss and that make this really weird looking terrain that you can't really walk on because your foot might fall in. It's so hard to explain because it's strange. But I did like a couple of drone videos and that sort of thing from Iceland, just because it was like every direction you pointed your camera in, it was like you got gold. So hard to take a bad photo in Iceland unless you're
Yeah.
taking a picture of the road. But it's definitely weird because it's like you're isolated, you're so far up, yet this country of 300,000 people has extremely high living standard. The facilities, everything is amazing. The roads, it's just incredible. They really have that Nordic mentality. Everything is operational and everything
Mhm.
is up to shape up there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful area. It looks like one day I'll have to get out there. So going back to your documentaries, I see the new one. that's in production right now is Lions of the East. It's about mystery big cats in New England. You got to tell me about this.
Oh,
What's
yeah,
going on out
absolutely.
there?
Well, man, I tell you, that's probably, people have seen that the most out of any other cryptid,
Really?
which a cryptid is a, kind of the term for a cryptozoological creature. It's, and cryptozoology is, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, the sort of study for hidden or unknown animals,
Mm-hmm.
creatures that are out of place or that are totally unknown, totally not verified, or maybe remnants from an earlier time period. And ever since I announced the project, I've had like 20, 30 different sightings, whether it's online or people coming up to me in person and telling me this stuff. And, I've heard for years in New England of all the different lion sightings, mountain lions in particular. And, we're technically not supposed to have them out here. So,
Right. Yeah.
technically they're extinct. They've been extinct for a while. There's been sightings that have been confirmed. 2011, in Connecticut, there was one that was killed, and it actually had like a chip or a tracking device on it. It was from North Dakota, so it had walked all the way to, 30 miles outside of New York
Wow.
City, hit by a car. Yeah. So there have been confirmed sightings, but like I said, just the volume of reports that are out there is staggering. And you do have to say, well, a portion of them are probably people seeing another animal and misidentifying it. That happens with a lot of these subjects because eyewitness testimony, unfortunately, is notoriously bad.
Mm-hmm.
People can kind of have mistakes and things like that. But when you have the really interesting sightings, people seeing something up close, like I kind of said with the champ stuff, they know the animal in the area. Maybe they've hunted the area their whole life. When they see something that throws them off, that really lends credence to it. And yeah, so I've had so many sightings, and it's basically an exploration of these sightings. And I'm talking to state and wildlife officials who say that there's no evidence that these creatures exist, and then there's researchers who say that they believe that there are breeding populations, and they were killed off essentially.
Right.
In the late 1800s, early 1900s, most of the New England states and most of the Northeast actually had mountain lions officially go extinct. They were hunted to extinction. So, the theory is perhaps that there are individuals from the Western populations. So basically the Rocky Mountains, sort of your area, is
Yeah.
where the current range of the mountain lion starts and goes down into, the whole Rocky Mountain range, basically up until Canada, Alberta, and then into the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, that whole area, the Sierra Nevadas, California, whatever the case may be. So, these individuals may be moving eastward. That's one of the theories. And, some of the researchers I've talked to that I'm going to be interviewing actually next week, I'm interviewing a lady who researches this and claims to have 3,000 sightings in New Hampshire alone.
Wow.
And New Hampshire's a pretty small state. Like I said, New Hampshire has a lot of woods, but compared to Colorado, you could probably fit New Hampshire in there like 10 times. But
Yeah.
combine that with upstate New York, which is millions of acres, into Canada, into Quebec, millions of acres, all of New England, the northern tier of New England at least, majority woods, mountainous terrain, a lot of that kind of stuff. There's a lot of space. So, this particular researcher believes that the eastern population never went extinct, and thinks that this creature managed to, adapt to humans hunting it. And they say that mountain lions have a very large range of territory. It can be almost up to 100 miles in certain parts of like the West Coast.
Wow.
And I asked her about that, and she simply said, they probably have adapted to have a smaller range. It's not unheard of for animals to adapt to human behavior and learn to avoid us. So that's really interesting. That's something I'm going to explore. Do we have just stragglers who are making their way from the West Coast or even the Midwest? In places like Wisconsin and Minnesota, they're having a lot of sightings, a lot more sightings than the East Coast. So they're saying that the creatures are moving and repopulating their former range. So you'd imagine with that logic, if there's confirmed cases in Wisconsin and things like that, it's closer to Colorado, to Montana. And then the East Coast obviously is a little bit further, but you
Yeah.
have sightings up and down through the whole East Coast. And I'm focusing just on New England because it's easiest for me. And if I was to tackle like the whole East Coast, it would probably be insane. But the only established population of mountain lions, so this is like the North American puma, cougar, catamount. Those are all names for the same creature. The only established population they have is in parts of Florida. They're highly endangered, but they have down in the Everglades, they have mountain lions that live there, cougars, whatever you want to call them there in that case. But none of the other states on the whole eastern seaboard, there's plenty of sightings, but they're not confirmed by any of the wildlife, fish and games, or the state wildlife or game departments because they're officially supposed to be extinct. And I'm also going to explore a little bit of the question of, are these fish and wildlife officials, are they aware of these things and they don't really want to deal with it because, money's tight. They deal with bears and other animals already.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of conspiracies that I've heard of as well, saying that there's secret reintroduction programs to, bring this predator back into the ecosystem, or there's been deliberate efforts to cover up evidence of mountain lions. I'm not one to fan the flames of the conspiracy stuff, but I will definitely talk about it because I think, I like to share all sides of the story. And like I said, with the Champ thing, let people make up their own mind, essentially.
Yeah, and with mountain lions and, like you say, mystery big cats, they're not exactly Bigfoot, right? They're not exactly the Loch Ness Monster. They're not as elusive. You would think with so many sightings, somebody would have, captured them on video, or there would be more concrete evidence. And I'm sure there is. Maybe there is something going on. That's fascinating. But in your description here, you say sightings of mountain lions and mystery big cats. Have you come across any testimony that's something a little beyond what a mountain lion would be? Maybe something, I don't know, more larger or more bizarre?
Yeah, definitely. So that's something I will definitely touch a little bit on, not too much in depth, but so there's this whole phenomena, which is in places like North Carolina especially, but other, New England as well. There's people that report seeing black cats, so large mountain lion-sized cats that are completely black, so almost like a Black Panther type creature. And these cases are really interesting because there's really no evidence to point to of mountain lions that are able to have that pigmentation. Maybe that's part of the theories. I think that there's these melanistic mountain lions, or that there are escaped pets, escaped Black Panthers or black leopard, jaguars, whatever the case may be. So that's really interesting.
Wow.
And then I've also heard the stories of, one of the researchers has told me of, a smaller than a mountain lion type black cat that's been seen in various parts of the Northeast that actually resembles the descriptions of the North American cheetah, which was one of the Pleistocene animals. So this would have been, contemporary of giant elk, the mammoths, the mastodons, those sort of creatures.
Oh, yeah.
People have allegedly seen this creature and they don't know what to make of it. And, the theory that perhaps populations of this animal may have survived. I mean, that for me is a little bit kind of stretching the credibility. But like I said, I like to go into the research as unbiased as possible and just let people tell their stories who have had sightings. And it's clear that the main focus will be the mountain lion aspect, because I think that there's just so many sightings and there's something going on. I mean, right. I think that there probably are mountain lions right now as I speak walking around. That doesn't mean that there's a breeding population. As has been proven that there are stragglers that have made it out here from the Western population. That's entirely possible. So does that mean that there's more of them? There are breeding populations? I don't know. And
right.
People think there are. So it's going to be interesting to talk to those people and talk to the state officials. And yeah, it's a very large subject. And I tried to be as narrow as possible. I originally was going to do the whole Northeast, but I realized that would just be so impractical, including like Pennsylvania and New York in there. I mean, those states are massive and more than enough in New England alone to cover that. And maybe in a future installment, I don't know, see how I'm feeling in a few years from now, if I want to tackle other parts of the country as well. We'll see.
Yeah. And, speaking of Pennsylvania, what a lot of witness testimony coming out of there. You ever look into the Mothman at all? I know I've heard a lot about that.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Mothman's really interesting. I mean that's been seen in various places. Obviously, the main sort of manifestation is Point Pleasant, West Virginia. You've probably seen the Mothman prophecies there,
Yeah.
and movies and that sort of thing. And then my buddy Seth, part of Small Town Monsters, actually did a documentary on the uh,
Oh, okay.
Mothman Pleasant a couple of years ago. So that one's really interesting. I think it's probably one of the best on the subject, just because they talk about all the eyewitnesses and all the theories and all the up to date kind of research, and not only that, but the Men in Black and the UFO stuff that happened in kind of conjunction to this event that sort of culminated in the collapse of this bridge in West Virginia. That was sort of a tragedy. A lot of people lost their lives on that during that accident. So that's interesting. And that whole Appalachian region from Pennsylvania down into Ohio and West Virginia have a really long history of strange stuff going on. It's probably one of the weirdest parts of America in terms of like phenomena going on at the same time. That's where you have the Flatwoods Monster in West Virginia. You have Bigfoot in Ohio, of course, and throughout this whole region, you've got triangle or flap areas where there's multiple phenomena going on in the same place, throughout Pennsylvania and those kind of states. I've done some research with friends of mine from the New England area about this kind of like a triangle or a flap area in Pennsylvania that was really fascinating. So there's a lot going on there. I mean, it's really interesting to have spent a little bit of time out there, and I've been out to West Virginia and parts of Pennsylvania and looking into it. There seems to be, it's like everything culminates in that region, and it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of stories from out that way. Yeah, it is fascinating out there. Somebody in the chat brought up, um, he says, I'm going to spell this wrong because it's in a P number. He says it's a loping creature called the snick snick. He says he's seen two of them in BC. I've never heard of that. But just speaking of have you heard of the snick snick? Sure.
I can't say I have.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what that is. Did he say BC, or what was the
Yeah, he
location?
says he's seen two loping creatures like them in BC, British Columbia, I imagine.
Say probably British Columbia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not too familiar with that, but maybe is that like a local Bigfoot? I'll have to look it up.
Probably. I imagine every place has got their own little thing. And I imagine you've done a more research into cryptozoology than I have. I'd imagine you're probably looking for future subjects for production. What's some of the ones you've stumbled upon that might be not as well known? Have you uncovered anything that's strange?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of weird ones. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in New England here that I guess is known sort of in the New England area, but there's things like the Puckwudgies, which have actually made it all the way into the Harry Potter universe. So these little like demon-like creatures, they actually come from the Wampanoag Indian kind of folklore from back in the day, and they're in this Bridgewater Triangle area, which is another one of these strange areas that has all kinds of phenomena going on, or alleged UFOs, Bigfoots, all that kind of stuff.
Always
in the same
a
place.
triangle area.
Yeah. I think the triangle, a lot of the people who are involved in that say, well, actually things happen outside of the actual geographical triangle. But ever since the Bermuda Triangle, we've been kind of hardwired to, it's easier to contain something within like a triangle. So you'll hear the Bennington Triangle, the Ospey Triangle, the Bermuda Triangle, the Bridgewater Triangle. They're always triangles because it's easier in our mind to help us imagine it. I mean, when you put it on a map, it probably looks like blob, because there's something going on here, something going on here. It's not exactly a perfect triangle, but I guess it's easiest to put it in that way. But yeah, some other stories I've heard, actually the more interesting ones are like the local legends for creatures. So like in New Hampshire specifically, sort of the local Bigfoot story up in the mountains. I did a documentary on this for the Sasquatch Out of the Shadows, was Shy Man, which is kind of what the Abenaki natives would call this creature, and the Wood Devil in that same area, which was described as this sort of tall, hairy, skinny creature. It was an old logging story from like the 1800s, and that stuff like that. That's what really is the interesting ones, are the local stories. Yeah, so that's actually what I titled the third episode of the series, Shy Man of the White Mountains, because I thought that was pretty fitting. But yeah, those local stories are really interesting because they're kind of low key and sort of unknown. And it, to me at least, you hear a story like the Wood Devils, and you're like, wow, I mean, those stories sound pretty similar to what we would in modern times describe as a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, that sort of thing.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking up pictures of it. Shy Man looks like Bigfoot to me.
Yeah, I don't know what you might come up with if you maybe look up a Shyman uh, Bigfoot, something like that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
found a
there's
couple of them. Shy Man of the
so
White
that
Mountain.
yeah, if you see that picture you're scrolling over, that actually is from my documentary. That was done by the researcher who I had interviewed. This was his art depicting
Oh,
the
okay.
creature. So that's actually his art, yeah, which is really cool.
Yeah, that is good. Good stuff there. I'd seen on your Twitter feed you had recently been interviewed by the Discovery Channel, huh?
Yeah, yeah, that was kind of cool. That
Yeah.
was a couple of we or back in October actually. Man, I don't even know how the whole thing came together. I just, I get these emails from time to time, production companies and things like that, kind of asking for advice or asking for information on certain topics. And this was really cool. It was like a project that actually um, the grandson of Jacques Cousteau and Richard Branson are teaming up to do a submarine expedition to the bottom of the Blue Hole in Belize, which is
Wow.
this massive sinkhole in Belize. You've probably seen pictures of it online. I mean, it's like so fascinating to see pictures of it. And I guess they're doing an expedition to it and they're live streaming it, and that's going to be on the Discovery Channel. So
Oh,
then,
yeah. I
it's
just
actually,
pulled up a picture. I have seen that before. That's pretty deep, huh?
yeah, I think it's like 400, 500 feet deep, and no one's ever been to the bottom. So they're going to actually take these mini submersibles with the crew inside, and they're going to go down to the bottom and see what they can find. And because it is a sinkhole, it kind of was formed
Right.
over. So there's um, stalagmites and stalactites sort of in there. And they interviewed me about sea monsters and cryptozoology in general, just talking about the possibilities of creatures that have been seen in the Caribbean and in particular in that area, an alleged story called the Blue Hole Monster of this kind of local diver, local fisherman, British guy who was one of the first that actually dove this site with Jacques Cousteau when he originally traveled there. Apparently, he told the story of having some kind of encounter with a creature, and they kind of had me talking about that. So that was pretty cool. I got to meet actually Jacques Cousteau's grandson. He was being interviewed like right before me, and the guy getting interviewed after me was actually I think he was a marine biologist who lived out in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and he studies great white sharks, which is really awesome because I've been really interested in great white sharks too.
Oh
And
yeah, everybody I think is not
yeah,
not to get too close though.
no, no, definitely not. I mean, I've done shark cage diving in South Africa,
Oh
and
man,
that was an unbelievable experience.
you're brave.
Um, Back in my college days, we were in the cage there with them, and oh, it was so cool. But back in September, actually, there was a fatal shark attack on Cape Cod where a great white attacked a surfer. It was the first fatal attack since like the 1910s, 1920s, because a lot of the seal populations have been growing, and Cape Cod is becoming a major spot for great whites. And I went to the exact beach where the guy had gotten killed, and I got to interview like a surfer who had seen it happen. And I'm still sitting on that footage. I'm trying to put a little something together on that, but it was cool. This guy, he actually goes in the airplanes and they do like the shark spotting during the summer months, especially to find the seals and where the sharks are.
Yeah,
It's really interesting. But yeah, that blue hole project. I mean, that's going to be really interesting. I
that's
don't know exactly.
fascinating.
I don't know when it's going to air. I think it's going to be like live streamed, so it'll be I think either the end of this year in December or into 2019. But they kind of conducted a few interviews with geologists and people who know about the terrain and that sort of thing, and then they wanted to do cryptozoology, and I think they're doing a whole alien bit as well and kind of more supernatural,
Yeah,
but they're differentiating it from the cryptozoological aspects of it. So it'll be a really cool project, and I'll obviously post more on social media when I find out more and when I have some links to share. But it's really cool.
yeah, definitely. And I'd imagine if I was on the production team and I'm like, we need somebody for in case we encounter a monster, I'm contacting Alexander. What kind of monsters would you talk about? What kind of stories have you heard from the water, um, in that aspect with cryptozoology?
Yeah, I mean, the ocean is, the last frontier in a way. It's almost 70%, I think, of the entire Earth's surface is covered by water, by ocean water. So there's something about lakes and these kind of bodies of water. In particular, I'm interested in the lake monsters, as we
Right.
talked about with Shane, but the ocean is that times like a million,
Yeah.
because it's just more vast area, and there definitely are species that we don't know about that lurk in the deep depths of the ocean. Whether or not they're monstrous or they're giant squids and that sort of thing, creatures that have been proven to be real animals, based off of legends like the Kraken, and we know the giant squid exists and that sort of thing. And that really interests me, in the sense that it's very promising. There's a lot of species that we probably don't know about, maybe holdovers from more prehistoric time as well, and only time will tell. I mean, I think the oceans intimidate people a lot, and we have this kind of cultural fear of the water with stuff like Jaws and this kind of thing, which is obviously understandable. But when people, when you like fly over the ocean, it's just as far as the eye can see, it's just water. And then it really puts into perspective that, wow, we live on like the 30% that is not covered in
Right.
water.
We
And
haven't explored our oceans much at all if you look at it in the broad view.
no, we definitely haven't. And it can be freaky at times. It's like this whole planet used to be at one point underwater, supposedly. That's, what the scientists, what they tell us at least. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to ponder that, and, our relationship to water. And most people actually, I think over 50, 60% of all Earth's population live near water. So either by the coasts, by the waterways, rivers, lakes, whatever the case may be. I mean, look at the United States. Majority of people live either on the west or the east coast. So it's, people like yourselves in Colorado and sort of these Midwestern states and these kind of mountain states, that the far fewer populations, in these areas. But even in that case, people will live near rivers, because those used to be the main mode of transport, the main mode of kind of goods moving through, and people. So we really have this relationship with the water. It's just so essential. And I think that's kind of where our fear of it comes to, because it's something we cannot control. It's one thing to go into a mountain range and chop down a whole forest and build like a village and build a settlement. That's something you can kind of control, but we really can't do that with like water. I mean,
Yeah.
we can build a bridge that goes over it or something, but we
Right.
can't. There's no way to tame it. So the idea that there's something that could be lurking in there that we don't know about, I think, really plays to
Oh yeah.
kind of our insecurities and our fears, and probably primal urges that we have from times in our evolution where we're more vulnerable to predators and that sort of thing. And the ocean really displays that, and these deep, dark bodies of water really display that, and in kind of a scary capacity.
Oh yeah, definitely. And as far as what we could do as building something, it would be maybe an underwater base, but then you'd end up like that one movie, Deep Blue Sea. That would suck.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah. So, anything in the future you have interest in, as far as I know you're in production right now with Big Cats, but there's anything that might be your maybe one of the ones that you got in your mind for the future endeavor for the path you're on right now?
Oh man, I
So
always get
many.
these. Yeah, yeah. There's always so many ideas. There's so little time, or there's the time is filled up with so many things. So
Yeah.
I kind of take it as it goes, and my interests vary from time to time. I think with a subject like Bigfoot, I kind of lose interest at I lose interest about it at times, and then I go back into being interested
It's been
when
covered
something.
so much too.
Yeah, and I think because it is like a huge cultural subject, it's very popular. It's always going to be there.
Yeah.
I think it's always going to be prevalent, and I've put out stuff on that, and like I said with the Sasquatch out of the shadows, I wanted it to be purposely open ended, so I could just kind of see where it went, see what I could do with it, and really have it as like a side passion project. But yeah, lake monsters is something I always love looking into. Like I said, Champ, I definitely want to check back on that. The big cats now, that's sort of the new thing I'm obsessed with now, and really knee
Yeah.
deep in. stories, and that is much more. I think it's bridging cryptozoology and sort of the more outlandish creatures with normal zoology, because most people, like you mentioned earlier, mountain lions, they're not like a yeti or a lake monster. They're much more tangible in terms of what people can accept as being real. So a creature that formerly lived in this area is being seen in this area, that somebody is going to believe that much more than they would perhaps an 8-foot tall ape-like creature that has been living under our noses this whole time. So it kind of bridges those sort of areas, and I really hope that the series can kind of just, or the documentary rather, that can just talk about the stories that people have had and the research, and really just make people more aware about it, especially if they've had encounters, because from what I've seen just so far, it's like an endless supply of sightings. Getting people to talk about it is another thing. That's another issue you always run into, like we talked about a little bit earlier, but definitely very interesting. And like I said, I have a lot of ideas, a lot of things that I'm kind of cooking up, and definitely thinking about a book at some point.
Oh, that's cool, man. Yeah.
Whether or not it'll be cryptozoology specific or just kind of the unknown is something from day to day, I'm like, one day, I'll wake up and I'll have this great idea and I'll be like, oh, I definitely need to write the book about this. But then I'll be like, well, what about actually doing this? And I definitely want to get that under my belt at some point, because I feel like just having a book, it's something I've thought about a lot, and it just, having the title author is often revered.
Oh, yeah,
and
absolutely.
I love to write. I do. And I feel like I don't write enough, just because I kind of get in the filmmaking and the drones and all the photography and the other stuff I do. But I really enjoy writing. It's something, even when I was in college, I did a lot of it. And, I studied political science and history as well, aside from communications. And that was very writing intensive. And it always was something I was interested in. And I just like the way it's a different medium than film. Film, I'm obviously trying to convey a very specific look for people and something that they can identify with.
Yes.
Whereas, obviously, a book, the person gets to paint their entire picture by themselves. And I really like that, because if I'm recounting my own stories, they get to imagine it for themselves, and that's a little bit different than filmmaking.
Definitely is. And you said, like the title author is great to have. I think documentary filmmaker is a great title also. And you know what I've noticed, and I'm not an analyst of trends or anything, but I've noticed a trend where it seems like documentaries are really picking up steam lately. And I've even found myself, with streaming services such as Netflix, I'm watching more and more documentaries. And
that's what I was going to say. Yeah,
I love it, and I love it. And for anybody out there, and I imagine there's a lot of people that are trying to get into it, what would you give as tips? What has helped you in creating documentaries and in this kind of fashion where you have to go out and get witnesses and stuff, and even the shots? What has really helped you progress, become better at it?
Honestly, I think just kind of getting out there and doing it. I don't think you need to be like a professional or have $1 million behind you. If you have a good story to tell, you could film something with your iPhone and make it look good. I'm not even kidding. Like, some of my documentaries, and people I know who do very, documentaries that are more professional than what I make, for sure, have told me, they use iPhone shots and things like that, and you'd never be able to tell, for like a moment or whatnot.
I know. It's getting so good, man. These phones are just getting amazing.
Yeah, if you have an idea and you have a story that you think is viable, kind of just go for it. Why not? Try. If it fails, if no one likes it, then hey, at least you tried. But you really don't have anything to lose in trying, unless you're putting like $1 million on the line and
right,
mortgaging your entire existence. I wouldn't recommend that. But just seeing if you can kind of tap into an audience and tap into a group of people that would be interested in some of the stuff you want to talk about. I don't really believe in this kind of hierarchy thing, because if you look at throughout, art and throughout history with like creative endeavors, especially now in the 21st century, everything is changing. Anyone can become, like a big shot with media and productions and that sort of thing. And streaming, like you said, documentaries are picking up. And I think in that vein as well, cryptozoology and some of these paranormal subjects are becoming much more popular and much more mainstream, because people are saying, oh, it's not that weird now. Before it used to be like 1 or 2 TV shows, like, oh, you watch the X-Files or
You're
search up
crazy.
kind of a weirdo. But now it's like you have on mainstream TV, they're talking about UFOs
Heck
and this
yeah.
sort of thing.
Ancient aliens, man. You couldn't get
Yeah,
more
exactly.
popular.
Definitely, and that sort of stuff. And I think we have this. I've talked about this a lot in other interviews. We have this reality TV sort of oversaturation. There's all these shows out, and
Oh
many
yeah.
of these supposed like channels on TV. They're like history and that sort of stuff. They do reality TV more than they do like documentaries. So I think the proliferation of streaming has allowed independent creators like myself to reach audiences without like Hollywood, without major
Yes.
studios that will cut up the content and not allow creative control. And that's one of the best things about the online stuff, the streaming and the kind of directly distributing your product to audiences, is that you have complete control over the narrative, in the sense that no one can tell you what to do. Like I said,
Yeah.
with my narrative, I try not to put my own personal kind of feelings into it as much as I can. I really like laying out the facts. Whereas, maybe if it's for like a major network, they'll try and make it seem more sensationalistic or slant in a certain way so that they convey a certain thing. With this, no, I can just put it as honestly as I can, and I really think that that's been a game changer. And you can be anywhere and do it. That's a big thing. You don't have to be in LA. You don't have to be in New York. You can be in, whatever part of the country you live in. As long as you got a good internet connection, that's it. You can do anything pretty much.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen that with technology advancing. You have so much access to these type of platforms where before you've had to have production studios or publishers. Now you don't need any of that.
No,
You
no,
do
exactly.
need some word of mouth and some advertising, maybe if you want to. But if you, like you said, if you had a good story, there's probably somebody that wants to listen. And
Definitely.
yeah,
I
we
know for example, like one of the big things has just been, just getting out and meeting people who are interested in this stuff is awesome. And you make connections and you get people who are interested in the same sort of things, and the networking, like with any business, any profession, everyone always says, networking is key. And I think networking is definitely a big thing for sure. And it can help out. And it's just, it's a good idea to get to know people who are interested in the same things as you. At the end of the day, it's just nice to talk with like-minded people. But, I also think that we live in this day and age where everything seems crazy. Everything is sensationalized, with the mainstream media, politics, everything is like over the top.
yeah,
So I
everything's got
think,
a shock value to it, clickbait.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And all these headlines, I go on Yahoo to log into my email, and every single article on there about Trump or about whatever the case may be is so over the top sensationalistic. You read the body of text, then it's totally unrelated to what the title was. It just wanted to grab your attention.
Yep.
And I think because we live in this time, the documentaries, they're like reality TV if it was actually reality, right? It's more of a accurate kind of or down to earth sort of portrayal of whatever the subject may be. I mean, you can go on like a Netflix or any of these sort of sites, and whole categories pop up for documentaries if you want to watch about, like pot farmers or whatever the case
Yeah.
may be.
Yeah,
It's cool.
moonshiners.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really cool. And I think that's a good idea. And, maybe that sort of scares the powers that be, because it allows, people who aren't exactly in the mainstream to change the narrative or control the narrative in a certain way. And we have seen a lot of that, not only censorship, but things in that sort of respect, with a lot of the big companies like Amazon really slashing some of the indie filmmakers' abilities to make like money on sites like Amazon. So there's a lot there. I mean, we live in this day and age where
Yeah.
everything's wild and everything's all over the place. But I think that the increase in documentaries is just going to keep on going. I think we're going to keep seeing that, and I welcome it, and I'll be there. I'm interested in this subject, and I'm just kind of getting started, so to speak.
Awesome, man. I'm loving it. Yeah, and you had said you were working with your buddy with Small Town Monsters. Is that your friend's company or website? Does he have a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
other videos on there, I guess, of
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, so I did the Champ series specifically for him and for the company, and the second season. So it's called On the Trail of ... Champ. the second season will be called On the Trail of Bigfoot, and
Oh,
he's doing that series, and it's kind of similar in the sense that it's like a deep dive into the whole history of the subject. And they have a ton of other documentaries. They did one about the Bray Road sort of werewolf out
I'm
in
seeing
Wisconsin.
that. Yeah, weird stuff. Oh man, scary stuff on here.
Cutting edge stuff for sure, and they do an amazing job. And just to be associated with them is awesome.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other people as well who are just putting out documentaries and crowdfunding, or just getting like small amounts of money, doing it on a shoestring budget, renting gear, other expensive gear that otherwise you might not be able to afford, and just putting stuff together. And it's pretty cool to see that. And we're creating this. It is a little bit of a niche subject, but we're definitely tapping into something. And the popularity of the whole subject of cryptozoology and this sort of stuff is really taken off.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's I think you're in a good genre, so to speak, if you want to call it a genre. It's probably more of a
Yeah.
niche, but it's definitely something that people are looking for nowadays. I think a lot of people have gotten tired of this. I can't tell you how many shows there are with about hunting down ghosts and hunting down Bigfoot. Um,
Yeah.
so it's nice to see other things like Champ. It's like I didn't know about Champ or this Flatwoods monster. That's great stuff. You said you'd rented equipment. I'm just interested for maybe
Yeah.
my own questions or other people that are looking to do this. What kind of equipment do you have to rent? Like are those the real expensive lenses or maybe even the cameras?
Yeah, so it depends, kind of like, as someone luckily who's studied this kind of stuff and communications and being exposed to it, at least I like to think I have an idea of what I'm doing. Sometimes I feel like I have no idea, and I see other people,
Oh, you're doing
talk
great.
all the techniques and technicalities and the specs of products. I'm like, wow, I don't know any of this. I'm like, I like the cameras that shoot in the best quality I can get and like create the least amount of problems for me while I'm out in the woods or wherever the case may be, where I'm able to just like get it running. I don't have to do 50 million adjustments, but some people like that style more. But yeah, it really depends on what you're looking for. I mean, for myself, I would rent DSLRs or those sort of cameras, and just depending on the kind of lenses you want for like an interview, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But there are various amounts. I mean, like I said, just iPhones are amazing now too, and those can be used for like B-roll, and the drones have cameras that shoot in 4K, and there's a lot of these rental places that are much more affordable than dropping like $3,000 on a camera.
Right.
You can rent for $100. You can get a 4-day rental basically of an awesome camera, and you can just shoot that thing till you get sick of it and get like 50 gigs of footage from a weekend. And that's kind of the approach that I took with the Champ series in particular, and some of the other stuff.
That's awesome, man. Well, hey, man, you're doing great. I love this Lions of the East. I'm going to check it out once you get done with it. When do you think it's going to be out, by the way?
That's a good question. I think I'm aiming for the spring, so spring of 2019. Just right now, I have all these interviews going on, and this next week I actually have like three or four actually interviews coming up. So there's kind of right in the thick of it, and I'm hoping to kind of cover each of the New England states in their own sort of way,
Yeah.
at least for a little bit, and talk to eyewitnesses and that sort of thing. So, just deep in production now. And because it's not something like Champ where I would just go up for a weekend and bust it all out, this is a little bit more difficult because I have, witnesses and people that are living in different areas. So I kind of just do it in my free time. And when I get a chance, I go do an interview. So doing a little bit differently, definitely than some of the other productions I've done. But I like it. And I'm hopefully this will be, I mean, it's going to be a feature for sure. I just hope it'll do justice to the subject, and I guess we'll have to see how that comes out.
Oh, definitely. I think it will, man. And you know what? You talked about interviews coming up. I appreciate you so much making time to interview with me. It's been fascinating talking to you. How would people get a hold of you if they wanted to ask you something specifically that they couldn't tonight?
Yeah, definitely. My website is petakovmedia.com, so that's PETAKOV media.com. You can find virtually links to everything I have on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And you can email me. My email's on there. It's like a Yahoo. It's like my whole name with just at Yahoo. So you can feel free to send me questions or anything like that, or people who have any sightings they want to report or anything like that. I'm very open to talking about that. And then, yeah, like I said, I have all the other sort of social media, platforms out there, and Twitter, at Petakov Media. That's my handle. And those are probably the easiest places to get a hold of me.
And this guy in the chat, Lancifer Wildwood, he said he's seen the Snicknick. You need to contact Alexander, man. Tell him about that. That might be something to look into.
Snicknick. Okay, because I Googled it. I did like a Nick, and then I separated them, but okay.
Yeah, he said they lope rather large. Good luck looking it up.
Interesting. Definitely. I mean, if you want to hit me up, I guess he posted a link in the chat. I'll check that out too. Yeah. But
all right, man. Well, hey, we're going to cut it here. Thanks so much for coming on, Alexander. And I look forward to seeing the stuff you make in the future. Look forward to the big cats one. And, man, thanks again for coming on, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been awesome. I mean, I could talk about this stuff literally 24 hours if I had some food by my side and some water. I love this stuff. It's awesome to be able to talk about it. Thanks for letting me chat about it, and definitely I'll look forward to future episodes. Kind of what I told you before the chat was that what I like about this show in particular is that you're not a cryptozoology show specifically. You're not a geopolitics show, but you talk about all that different stuff, and that's cool because it's definitely a variety.
Yeah, we try to hit on everything, man. We're trying to just hit on everything, and just a lot of people, they want to talk. That's what we found. A lot of people want to talk, and it's great because this is a great format, long format talking. We can kind of get to know you,
Definitely, yeah, and keep up the good work. That's all I can say.
Awesome. Well, you too, man. You keep up the good work too, brother. And I'll let you go so you can go to bed. It's probably late.
Yeah, just about 12:30 here on the East Coast. But that's I'm a night owl anyway, so I'm probably going to end up doing some work now or playing some more Dead, whichever one takes priority, but it's a Friday night, so.
Absolutely. Well, have a good weekend, Alexander. Thanks again, man.
All right, thanks, man.
I'll talk to you again. All right.
Bye.
Bye. That was Aleksander Petakov, everyone, joining us. His website is petakovmedia.com. You are listening to the Hidden Path Podcast. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. That's all we have tonight. But we appreciate you listening. HiddenPathPodcast.com is our website. We're also on iTunes, Spotify, all kinds of platforms. This is brought to you by godlikeproductions.com, our home and community forum for our producer, Renaissance Ted. I'm Resonance Rich. Thanks for tuning in tonight. You guys have a good weekend. We'll see you later.